you're running a sham if you're not taking care of the foundations and trying to do all sorts of fancy stuff on top of it. So really, Daylight's trying to work backwards from how humans work. It's trying to work backwards from physiology, from psychology, and reinvent. Okay, what would a computer screen look like now that we know how dangerous blue light is? Now we know how important circadian rhythms is. So we can own our health. Because right now, they're making us own the externality of the bad sleep, of the diabetes, of the messed up metabolism, of the messed up dopamine systems. Right? They're making us own the externality of the addiction, of the distraction. What if we flip it? Start with something smaller, humbler, but solid. Right? And you could argue that's what Bitcoin is. It is humbler. It doesn't have all the sophistication of an existing financial system, but the core is solid. And from there, you can rebuild a new world. And that's what we're trying to say. How would you rebuild computers if you started today with our values?
Greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. My name is Walker, and this is the Bitcoin Podcast. The Bitcoin time chain is 847809, and the value of 1 Bitcoin is still 1 Bitcoin. Today's episode is Bitcoin Talk, where I talk with my guests about Bitcoin and whatever else comes up. Today, my guests are Anjan and Tristan of Daylight Computer. This was a really fascinating and honestly eye-opening discussion, and I know you're going to love it. We talked about their journey and the creation of the Daylight Computer, as well as the tech behind it, but we also get deep into the physical and mental health effects of technology, what these devices that we're all attached to at all times are doing to us and our children, how we take the power back from technology so it's a tool that betters our lives instead of making them worse, technological sovereignty, and a whole lot more. Before we dive in, do me a favor and subscribe to the Bitcoin Podcast wherever you're listening, and maybe give this show a 5-star rating if you're enjoying it. Or don't, Bitcoin does not care, but I sure would appreciate it. If you'd rather watch this show than listen, head to the show notes for links to watch on YouTube, Rumble, and now on Noster. But if you're like me and you prefer to just listen to your podcasts, I highly recommend you check out fountain.fm. Not only can you send Bitcoin to your favorite podcasters to give value for value, but you can earn Bitcoin just for listening to this fucking podcast. And if you are already listening to the Bitcoin Podcast on Fountain, consider giving this show a boost or creating a clip of something you found interesting. Finally, if you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, hit me up on social media or through the website bitcoinpodcast.net. Without further ado, let's get into this Bitcoin talk with Anjan and Tristan of Daylight Computer. I was trying to figure out where to start with this, and I like to start out generally with just a question, and maybe I can pose it to both of you guys. Take it whichever way you want. But before we kind of get into Daylight, I'd like to know kind of a little bit more about you guys and how you got here. So the question, and maybe Anjan, if you want to dive in first with it, just who are you? How did you get here today? I know.
Thanks for having us on, Walk.
Yeah, no problem, man.
Simple question.
Not at all loaded with all sorts of potential there.
I think the best way to understand me is I'm like the son of a rebel psychiatrist, and he was like a communist. Like there's literally in India, there's something called Naxals. They were like, you go into the villages and you train like as a communist. Like they teach you how to shoot. They teach you how to like crawl under barbed wire. And he did that for a little bit of time. And then he realized how insane it was. And he went the opposite. And then, what we had in our house was like Rothbard and Mises and stuff like that. And he became like full-on libertarian. And I think that experience, plus being a psychiatrist, is what shapes me. He's an idealist, but then when you get to see what a lot of things that are meant to be idealistic are in practice, you're like, whoa, this actually isn't, And that's where I don't think he's like a hardcore libertarian, but I think it's the sense of like always seek truth rather than fall for an ideology. And in many ways, it's like having no ideology and just principles is like the real way to be. And being a psychiatrist, people before they walk into your office, they're a hedge fund manager, and then they walk into your office and they're insane, right? Like it's a normal mom, and she comes in, and you're like, oh my god. And so you start to not look at reality on the surface, because all these people who seemingly are normal and waiting in the line before you in Chick-fil-A, they're all batshit crazy. And so it really, at some deep level, you stop trusting that reality is what it appears to be. You're always like, okay, what's the truth? And I think I grew up in a house covered in books, from biology to the stock market to Ron Paul stuff about the Federal Reserve to whatever it may be. It's like, okay, this is what reality says it is, like, but what's the actual truth? Like, what's underneath? And I think even what daylight is just asking the question, okay, like, this is what people say computers are, and they have to affect us in this way, and they have to be this way, and we have to have this rent-seeking. Okay, but what's the actual reality? Like, what's the actual truth? So I think what I am is somebody who's constantly trying to call bullshit on the adults, trying to constantly ask questions about why things are the way they are, and try to find out what the deeper truths are, whether that's health, whether that's technology, whether that's sovereignty, whether that's social coordination technologies we use, money, etc. I think I'm just kind of like that fly, like kind of Socrates, the gnat that is just like stinging. And maybe I didn't answer your question directly, but
No, you answered it perfectly. And the nature of that question is I want to see what people come up with, and so thank you for that, because that does tell me a little bit more about you. And Tristan, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, basically hit my head one too many times at the end of my college career, and had concussions, and my health just went out of control. Like, couldn't do anything, couldn't play sports, barely could go to school, couldn't exercise, and I had that taken away from me, and I realized that this was the worst feeling in the world. I was not any longer in the driver's seat of my own life. I was super limited. And then that really led me to have a strong distrust in the centralized healthcare system, because I got no answers. So I went down this self-healing rabbit hole, simultaneously was kind of learning more and more about Bitcoin and crypto at the time, which I learned the hard way. But basically, through my own self-education, self-empowerment, I learned that there is this whole space available to learn about how to better your health. And none of this was in the centralized recommendations from the governing bodies. And a lot of it was accessible. It was free. It was just lifestyle interventions, whether that's through diet or getting outside, sleeping on time. And, I became obsessed, and I wanted to learn more. And I realized simultaneously that I was into Bitcoin, and 2020 happened, and that cemented like maxi status with the, macroeconomic environment. And I was like teeter-tottering between my passions of Bitcoin and health. And I was like, why am I passionate about these things so, deeply? And it was for the same reason. It was because if you're in control of your health, you're in control of your money, you're really in the driver's seat of your life. You can be outside the centralized systems that are plaguing society, and you have that individual sovereignty, and no one can really take that away from you. So that's kind of the mantra I've been living by, and trying to get, more Bitcoiners taking control of their health, and more folks in the health space educated about Bitcoin. Kind of been my mission for a few years. And then as an electrical engineer, really fascinated with the electromagnetic aspects of our health and biology, which is light, EMFs. And this is also how we understand that nature is good for us. Because every time I spend, more cumulative time outside in nature, I realized I felt better. My symptoms became less and less. And, I was doing all the interventions, healthier clothes, food, mitigating toxins. And I realized there was just one big one left. And it was our devices. It was our technology. And the more I try to build a personal brand on social media, the more I realized it's actually starting to reverse some of the progress that I had been making. And I knew it was possible from an engineering perspective to create healthier technology, because I worked in that industry, but I never thought it would happen for another 5, 10, 15 years. Maybe some, rich Bitcoiners would fund this eventually because they need a hardware vehicle. And then I met Anjan, and I was like, all right, I'm in. Like, I'm working for you. I'm working for Daylight. This is the most incredible mission, and I'm going to make sure every Bitcoiner, every person in the health space knows about this and it embraces us. And it's ultimately coming back to the most decentralized system, which is nature, and understanding that that's the one source of truth that we can all rely on. So, yeah, this is so fun, and it's been a wild couple months talking to folks like yourself, and appreciate you having us on.
Well, I appreciate you guys coming on, and I love the common thread of truth between both of you and seeking it. I think that's something you find in most real Bitcoiners you talk to. And I think it truth about your health and about nature is something that seems to almost be this natural byproduct of seeking the truth about money. Because it's like once you realize, like, oh, the money's fake, this is all a lie, everything we've been told, like this base layer of everything is fake, well, what else have they been lying about? And then I think that's why there's so many rabbit holes that branch off from Bitcoin. And that's, a beautiful thing, is it creates these like incredible little diverse sub genres of Bitcoiner within this space. And I love it. And when I saw what you guys were doing, it was like, oh, I mean, this is cool, because your whole thing is like, this is something that's made to be used outside. And so maybe before I start singing its praises too much, can you guys, maybe we go back a little bit more and we just say, what is Daylight? What is the Daylight computer? And kind of, can you maybe talk about that journey a little bit of actually deciding that this was something that the world needed?
Right. I think the one line way to describe it is Daylight is an attempt at making a healthier, distraction-free, minimalist, sovereign computer. And the longer way of describing it is it's really just asking the question, if you were to reinvent a computer today, the display, the electronics, the mechanical, the software, the networking stack, all of it, given the values that I have, that Tristan shares, that you share, how would things look different? And you could say that Daylight is just like the first 1% of answering that question. And like our core innovation is we invented a new computer display technology. With the key aspect is that it doesn't produce blue light, and it can be used outside in the sun. And it can be used at nighttime with an amber zero flicker backlight. And like, why? Like, why did we do this? It goes again. Right now in technology, it's built with the value of sex appeal. It's like as many colors, as many like pixels, as like beautiful as possible, and then they can show that off in a spec. So ultimately, it's like working backwards from a cynicism about how people make buying decisions. Like I think Tristan can wax even more poetic about it than I can. But why did we make a black and white blue light free computer screen and build everything around it? Is it goes back to like priorities. Like, who cares about the sex appeal of those things? Like, it's your foundation, and your foundation is your like physical sovereignty, which is health, your mental sovereignty, which is like focus, and then your actual sovereignty, right? Which is what we're talking about. And so I don't care that you lose color. I don't care that if it has less pixels or less fancy specs. You're running a sham if you're not taking care of the foundations and trying to do all sorts of fancy stuff on top of it. So really, Daylight's trying to work backwards from how humans work. It's trying to work backwards from physiology, from psychology, and reinvent. Okay, what would a computer screen look like now that we know how dangerous blue light is? Now we know how important circadian rhythms is. So we can own our health. Because right now, they're making us own the externality of the bad sleep, of the diabetes, of the messed up metabolism, of the messed up dopamine systems. Right? They're making us own the externality of the addiction, of the distraction. What if we flip it? Start with something smaller, humbler, but solid. Right? And you could argue that's what Bitcoin is. It is humbler. It doesn't have all the sophistication of an existing financial system, but the core is solid. And from there, you can rebuild a new world. And that's what we're trying to say. How would you rebuild computers if you started today with our values?
No, I love that. And Tristan, I'd love, because I know obviously health, as you said, has become a huge focus for you, as it should be for like literally everyone, because it's like we get one of these bodies and a limited amount of time on this beautiful earth. None of us knows just how scarce our time is when, when we're born, but we know it's going to end at some point. And it's so sad that so many people, I would say the vast majority of people, just disrespect this one body that they have. And sometimes it's not their fault because they don't even know what they're doing to it. And I think that's what you were getting at, Anjan. But maybe, Tristan, can you talk a little bit just about like the actual health reasons for not wanting to bombard yourself with blue light, the importance of sunlight, and like why this actually matters? Because I feel like sun has also become this weird boogeyman where it's like, well, make sure you slather up the SPF 100 every time you go out and stay in the shade, and maybe just work under fluorescent lights all day long, and that'll make you a good little worker bee,
Yeah, it's definitely become a mainstream narrative, and it's exciting to see the Bitcoiners actually kind of combating that. Stephen Lubka sent me a manifesto he wrote today or the other day for Swan on sunshine maximalism, and that's what I like to call it, because it's really a testament to the ultimate source. And as an engineer, I think about everything as input signals, really quite simply. And the input signals that our biology, our bodies are designed to take are the ones that have been around for hundreds of thousands of years, for humanity, and millions of years for all of biology on this planet. And that is the sun. That is, the natural magnetic and electric fields of the earth. That is the food that naturally grows or lives on this planet, whole foods, plants, or, one ingredient sourced foods, animals. And I think the Bitcoin space has embraced the diet side quite a bit with the carnivore movement and disrespecting seed oils, and it's great to see that. But now I urge you to continue down your learning path of sovereignty from the health perspective, because it's way more than just diet. And yeah, we might eat 2 to 3 times a day and drink water, which is another important input to our body. So having high quality water that's not full of fluoride and birth control is important. But maybe you're drinking 10, 15 glasses of water a day. You're consuming light as an input signal, whether that's visible or non-visible light, all the time, 24/7, 365 days a year. And you could argue this is, the highest level, the first signal, the most important signal to our biology, and everything is downstream from that, because light is how our body tells time. And if you think of any system or any scenario, right? Like if we wanted to do this podcast, and actually 3 of us did show up at different times here, but if we wanted to do a podcast or meet in person for dinner or something, and the times we said, were completely different for each person, and if they were an hour or 2 different, then we would never meet. It would be chaos. We would never be able to meet. And that's kind of what's happening in our body. That synchronicity is then off when our body clock is off. And that causes chaos, right? Like in any system, when communication and timing is off, it causes chaos. And biological chaos is, or can also be known as, inflammation. And that's really a root cause, a simple way of saying that this is potentially a major cause of all chronic health conditions. And there's, now research that is saying that, and it's really just a simple thing. If we have the right input signals to our bodies, we will have the right output signals, which are energy, libido, the ability to detoxify, and the ability to be resilient. And for me, health is the ability to do that naturally without exogenous stimulants or, crutches. It's really getting to the root cause of why we aren't optimal. And it's challenging in a modern toxic world. So the light piece is really important to grasp. And we get into what are the distorted input signals that we are giving our body. And since the invention of the light bulb in the late 1870s and Tesla lit up the Chicago World Fair, and also the advent of electricity, which is powering this, right? So you could argue that the electricity, the electrical grid, its main job at first, of course, was to power lights. And that combination of lighting up the world has led to this downward spiral of the input signals we're giving our body. So today we have artificially lit environments with LEDs and fluorescence that have very different spectrums, brightness, and highly flickered outputs, which is completely alien to our biology. And because of that, our body is now confused. We're staying up all night with this bright blue light. So our body is not sure if it's 10 p.m. or maybe it's 9 a.m. And then we have this dull light throughout the middle of the day, which is when we're supposed to really be outside. And you can tell the difference, right? If you're indoors and then you walk outside, you're like, oh my God, it's so bright out. And that's the input signal we should be getting, is that outdoor, really bright light. And that's the blue light. We demonize blue light, but it's part of the sun. However, when the sun goes down and we're staring at our phone screens at 10, 11 p.m., there's no blue light in nature. That's completely artificial, and it's giving our body a highly confusing signal, and then it's jacking up our cortisol, our stress hormone, and suppressing our sleep hormone, melatonin. So we can't sleep well. Maybe you fall asleep, maybe you take melatonin, maybe you drink, maybe you smoke weed, or maybe you do other things to help you fall asleep. But you're not getting that deep restorative sleep. And that's really where you're getting that cell repair and restoration from all the shit you're exposed to during the day, all the toxins. And that's why people are like, oh, my grandpa smoked cigarettes and, drank whiskey and lived to 110. Maybe not 110, let's say 95 to be more realistic. And they got away with it because they probably woke up with the sunrise, worked outside. At the turn of the 20th century, a good percentage of our country was in agriculture. They were farmers. They were working outside, labor jobs. And they didn't go to bed far after the sun set. And they had incandescent lights or candles, which incandescent lights are far better than LEDs and fluorescence in terms of their spectrum. That's another funny coincidence as to why they're banned, because they're energy inefficient, but that's because they have this red and infrared component to it. So you can't get away with that anymore. And now we're handing our children iPads and phones when they're 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. And we're really just having a giant science experiment. And there is plenty of data showing harmful effects of a disrupted circadian rhythm, of artificial light at night, and even of electromagnetic fields, such as radio frequencies and power frequencies from the grid. And it's really simple, All we have to do is return to a life that is more aligned with nature, more in line with our biology. And the past 150 years, and then especially the past 20 years, we've been on this exponential departure from the natural input signals. And the main detriment of modern technology keeps us indoors. 90% of our time is spent indoors. And that is giving us a completely distorted input. And that is why our output signals, our energy, our libido, our ability to fight conditions, fight diseases, is at an all-time low. And the signal to noise ratio is also at an all-time low. So that's a bit of a rant, but I think it's important to cover that. And the best part about getting outside, getting sunlight, is that it's free. So you started this with saying, demonization of sun. Yeah, lather up in your sunscreen. Don't go outside for long. It causes skin cancer. Did any of these things exist more than 150 years ago or even 100 years ago in high prevalence? No, they did not. And most people worked outside. They lived outside. But it's free and accessible to anyone. It costs $0 to go outside. It costs $0 to get your feet on the ground and connect with the earth. But guess what's propping up our fiat monetary system? Healthcare, sick people, and all of the medications and dollars that are coming with that.
Well, I appreciate the rant, because as I told you, this is a safe space for rants anytime. And I think that that's such an important important point that you brought up at the end. Like, again, this comes back to base layer stuff, right? The stuff that is really, really good for you, walking, preferably outside, getting sunlight, fresh air, drinking water, like these are all extremely low or no cost activities. You know, maybe a little bit of money to make sure you're getting your hands on some halfway decent water, depending on where you live. Sure. But for the most part, these are cost a lot less than your fancy gym membership, you know, and it's great for you and it makes you feel good. I think one of the greatest pleasures in life is being bare chested in the sunshine. Like I should start honestly recording this podcast outside. I feel like a bit of a LARP for not doing it, you know, need to figure out the setup a little bit, but I'll see what I can do. But no, so I want to, there's a couple of pieces there I want to get into. And one of them is the kind of the children piece and the effects this is actually having. Cause like, you know, folks that are like the boomers, yeah, they're having some ill effects from this, but like they've already lived for 60 some years. Like, sure, they can still have a really nice rest of their life, but like what concerns me is our kids, and especially as a new father with a young son, trying to figure these things out. But before we kind of dive into that a little bit, Anjan, I'd love it if you could talk a little bit just about like the technology itself from so that people kind of understand like why this is actually different, like why this isn't just another, because people have seen like the e-ink, you know, a lot of people have had Kindles or like the remarkable things like that.
Right.
Can you talk about, you guys actually made something different. You didn't reuse something old, you made something new. So can you talk about that a little bit so people understand like what we're actually dealing with here and what kind of that shift means?
Cool. Yeah. So there's two types of computer screens. There's emissive or transmissive. Think of it as it's a flashlight, and then you have silhouettes on top. That's what your iPhone is. That's what your iPad is. That's what your TV is. There's a flashlight, and then it moves the silhouettes, and that's what you get images. That's how almost all computer screens are. Most people don't realize there is actually a second category that in the beginning was thought to be a potentially just as pervasive and competitive category, but, you know, it's niche. And those are reflective screens. And the key property of a reflective screen is versus having a flashlight behind that then shines through, a reflective screen bounces the light that hits it. So this is like this piece of paper. It's not emitting light. It doesn't have a flashlight. It doesn't produce light. It's just bouncing whatever sunlight's coming through the window. It's hitting this and then going into my eye. And so most objects in nature are reflective. Other than a fire or, you know, snow glare or a firefly, those are emissive, but almost everything else is just reflecting the sunlight. And this is what our ocular system, this is what our vision system is all built for. Our saccades, our blink rates, our tear films is to look at the real world, which is reflective objects. And so the kind of idea was, let's work backwards from what's natural and natural principles. Reflective screens are the right way to do that. The problem is, to your point, there are some existing reflective screens, like the Kindle, the Remarkable, they are just extremely limited. They are so slow. They can only refresh, you know, 1 or 2 times per second. You can read Harry Potter on them, you can take notes on them, but you can't use them for more of computing. They're so slow that you can't do email. You can't do ChatGPT. You can't, you know, use a mobile wallet. You can't do going through a PDF or going through a browser. You can't really type on it well. And so they're not computers. They are e-readers or e-notebooks. And so kind of the key call to arms is, hey, if we could make a reflective screen technology that was super fast, you would get the benefits of being able to use it in the sun. You get the benefits of it's not straining you. It doesn't cause eye strain. It doesn't give you headaches because it's like looking at normal objects. It's like looking at a paper book. And it doesn't produce blue light. And potentially, it's a scalable technology you can go and reinvent all of computing with. You can make a monitor with this. You can make a laptop with this. You can make a phone. And essentially, you can create a whole class of kind of healthier, minimalist, sovereign computers, not just from the software, all the way down to the hardware. And so that was our core invention, making the first 60 FPS, i.e. as fast as your iPhone or iPad, e-paper reflective screen. And so
it's kind of it's kind of mind blowing. And you mentioned that this technology was actually maybe it's or the idea for it has been around for a little while, but
yeah,
was not. Can you talk about like a little bit of just the history of that? Because I'm curious, like,
sure.
Why did that get kind of tossed to the side? Did we just not have the information to know how bad the other emissive version was, or was there something else at play?
Yeah, basically what we did is we resuscitated a technology that was in the dustbin of the display world. It's 30 years old.
Wow.
And essentially a bunch of random professors were convinced based on first principles that this was a viable technology, and were just researching. But along the way, you just ran into problems. There was manufacturing problems, there was process problems, there was material science problems. And some of it was just solved because manufacturing got better over time. But the real unlocks was every time one of these professors, mainly from Japan, but also from the Netherlands and Germany, came up with a new material science innovation. And the reason it was thrown to the side is because it just simply wasn't good enough. And actually, it started to get close to being good enough in like 2015. But when I became an expert in this industry, when you talk to the people, they're like, oh, why would you pay attention to something 25 years later? People paid attention to it 10 years later. And 15 years, like you're like an idiot if you're just like holding out with hope, right? Like there's no seeming light at the end of this tunnel. So I got very lucky that I went in and I just analyzed all the potential reflective display technologies. And I did this in 2018, 2019. And some of the most fundamental papers to make this possible came out in like 2018, 2015. And so I basically just got very lucky, and a bunch of other things came together too. Other manufacturing technologies were finally ready, and so I tell Tristan, it's not like we can get credit. We just happened to sweep on an area that was finally ready to reveal dinosaur bones, right? Like it's just the universe is ready for something at a certain period of time. So yeah, we essentially resuscitated a really old technology and made it viable again.
I can't help but see the parallel to Bitcoin a little bit in terms of the combination of older ideas that had been around for a while, Hashcash and proof of work and
Chaumian eCash.
eCash, things that had been kind of done in isolation. That it was cool. It was like a neat thing for a small group of people, but didn't really have the potential to scale because it ran into various roadblocks. But then, somebody comes along or some people come along and decide to put some of these things together in kind of a novel way, but using these, old ideas, and then presto, you have Bitcoin. And it seems like, again, a lot of it is like right place, right time, right people, preparation, meeting that opportunity. So I think that's really cool. I did not know that this technology had been around for a solid 30 years, and sounds like its time has come.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit also just about if we can like nerd out a little bit for a second, and apologies to anybody who's like, get back to the sunshine talk, which we will, I promise. But so you're running, I believe it's Soul OS. So it's a custom build of Android 13. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a modified Android 13. Yeah.
Okay. And I saw on your website, it basically said a distraction-free operating system, everything you need, nothing you don't. So can you talk just a little bit about like, what can you actually like do on this for people who are thinking of an e-reader or an e-notebook,
right?
In terms of like, is this a fully fledged tablet? Is this a full computer? Can I do everything that I would do on a on a iPad or on my phone? Does it have all those capabilities?
Yeah, no, I think the way to understand it is kind of there's three layers to it. One is it is literally an equivalent to like an Android tablet. So you can have your browser, you can do Gmail, you can do Google Docs, like you can do Excel, you can do Microsoft Word, you can do YouTube, you can do the browser, like whatever you want to do, you'll be able to do here. And if you do use the product as such, you can kind of think of it as like, like gluten-free cookies. You're still eating a cookie. Like you might still be honest and be like doing Facebook or whatever, but it's healthier, right?
Okay, I like that. I
mean,
don't like gluten-free cookies, but
No,
that's a good analogy.
That's why I paused. I was like, I need to come up with a better analogy here. So the idea is like, like because if you're still doing Facebook and this and that, there's maybe better things you can do with your time, but let's not be prescriptive of what you do. Ultimately, you can do whatever you're going to do in a computer with the health benefits. And there, it's purely just about the hardware. And software-wise, you can do whatever you can do on your existing tablet or phone, specifically tablet. The second layer of it is we are building a kind of lockdown minimalist focus mode. We call the first mode cocaine mode, and the second one is kale mode. And I'm not even a big fan of kale, so terminology here may all need some work. But the whole point of this one is it is beneficial to have focus tools. And your normal computer is great at Netflix. It's great at having 50 tabs open. It's great at kind of being very ADD, doing lots of stuff, multitasking. But what it's not good at is when you need to read the Bitcoin white paper. And you need to sit and focus. Right? It's not good for when you actually want to go deep and you want to learn. And so that second kale mode is to be kind of locked down to like reading things, taking notes, writing stuff, or knowledge work tools like an Excel or a Microsoft Word or a mind mapping tool or something like that. And the basic idea is it's complementary. In the first one, it could be a replacement for your existing computer. In the second mode, it'd be complementary to your existing computers. And so I like to use our thing in a kale mode, especially if there's a bunch of stuff I need to read, whether it be Substacks, blog posts, long PDFs. I kind of load it all up onto it, and then I go sit outside with it. And it's just got that. I can't get distracted by Slack. I can't get distracted by WhatsApp messages or ESPN. It's just kind of locked down to the couple things I want to do. And I'd say those are the core like two modes. And then the third is we're modifying the actual operating system in deep ways. So for example, your Daylight ID, it might be a Nostr ID underneath. Your Daylight payments might actually be form of Lightning or eCash underneath. Because we control the OS, because of our hardware, we can take a lot of these rails and build them in deeply. And so that's where like we have a unique possibility of these don't need to be opt-ins. These don't need to be to download Chrome extensions. These don't need to be, hey, download this wallet and then figure out how to just like, store your key and do that. We can build all of it into an OS. We can make key management a first-party citizen. Now it's a lot of work. So it's a work in progress. And, we got years ahead of us to do this. But that's the true possibility is not just on the user-facing side, you make it distraction-free and you curate it to kind of knowledge work apps. You also have the possibility of building it into the OS, into the networking stack, into the browser.
Technology can be good or bad for us depending on how we use it. And one piece of technology that I can promise will be good for you because it keeps your Bitcoin safe is the Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. Head to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use promo code Walker for 5% off the fully open source Bitcoin only Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. Then get your Bitcoin off the exchange and into your own self-custody. The Bitbox O2 is honestly easy as hell to use whether you are brand new to Bitcoin, it's your first wallet, or you're a seasoned psychopath and you want to add another one to your stash. Again, it is Bitcoin only, and again, it is fully open source. You can head to their GitHub and verify it for yourself. There is no need to trust me. When you go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use promo code Walker, not only do you get 5% off, but you also help support this podcast. So thank you. And if you're brand new to Bitcoin and don't even know what a hardware wallet is, don't worry, because some people go down this rabbit hole solo and others want someone to guide them on their journey. And if you're one of the latter, check out bitcoinconsulting.us. Whether you're an individual and you want someone to help you with your personal Bitcoin strategy, or you're a company and you want help with integration, Bitcoin payments, implementing private projects, or general contractor services, bitcoinconsulting.us has you covered. A lot of you listening to this show may already be deep down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, but if you're listening to this podcast and feeling a bit overwhelmed, don't sweat it. Bitcoin Consulting has you covered. Go to bitcoinconsulting.us and book a consultation today. Again, that's bitcoinconsulting.us. bitcoin.us. I love the focus on attention and kind of really paying attention to how you are spending your time, paying attention to more conscious use of this device, because you guys are still building a tool. You're building something so you can still be able to do work and interact in this modern world we live in, but trying to do that in a more conscious way and trying to make from the bottom up, make the system such that it is it is actually beneficial to you. Because I think a lot of these systems, like, they weren't designed for them to be as healthy as possible for you. Quite the opposite. They were designed to sell you as much shit that you don't need as possible, to steal your attention, to constantly keep you to keep you engaged with, we don't care what, but with something, as long as it's in here, as long as it's in this device, as long as it's in this platform, as long as you're still scrolling through endless TikToks or whatever it may be. We just want to keep you in, because ultimately we are either harvesting your eyeballs and selling that data, or we are literally selling you something from our sales partners. So like this idea of, let's try and make, like, you may still do that, as you said, you may still use Facebook, you may still use X, whatever, but at least you have the option to enter into a more focused mode. And the actual experience itself, from a physiological standpoint, is going to be better for you, which I think is just, it gives me a lot of hope, I guess, like that there are folks building this. And I mean, you guys are obviously, you're both Bitcoiners, and you mentioned Nostr as well, and these kind of freedom forward, sovereignty forward technologies. How does that kind of factor into your vision for, like, where you see this going in the long term, in terms of how you actually build out these solutions, like your kind of guiding principles, and like, do you want to try and make a lot of this stuff open source? Do you, obviously some of it, like, you've stumbled upon some really cool stuff, so maybe, like, you might want to protect a lot of that IP, but I'm curious how that factors in, how you guys think about that, what the ethos is from your perspective as you look toward the future of something that could potentially, I hope, be really, really big and transformative.
I think there's two answers to that. I think the first one is, a lot of this comes from kind of having this as a central concept, being public benefit Apple. And almost all the decisions get simple when you have that as a value set. I'll explain what I mean. And I think the second thing is, I don't think I'm actually ideologically like, let's Bitcoin everything, let's orange pill everything. I think actually I still like to be like, what are the problems I have? What are the problems in society? What are the problems people have? And let's reverse engineer to figure out what the solution is. And I'll pick amongst what's best. And it happens to be, a lot of the times, guess what is the best available solution? And so, to answer your question about the open source, I think it comes back to being public benefit Apple. One of the difficulties with Apple is you're not sovereign, because you can't actually go and check their code and fork it yourself and change things. You're always in their walled garden at their behest. So our intention, it's not like, it just takes time to properly set stuff up to be open source and so on. But yeah, our intention is to open source as much as we can. Do it in a smart, pragmatic, incremental way. But basically, how else can you give people agency and sovereignty if they can't actually understand the ground they're standing on? And that's what software is, right? It's the ground you're standing on in the digital world. And so the things that we built, we put a lot of work into Unique, I think the reality is most people are still going to pick us because of the whole holistic user experience you can pick. Even when you open source things, you can't necessarily recreate full holistic experience. And so for the nerds out there, the DIYers, or people who want to set up stuff, they'll have the flexibility to do what they want. And for the vast majority of people, it'll just be easier to pick a holistic experience. And so I don't think it's just like a naive good intention. I think it actually allows you to segment the market. So it's actually, I think, good business as well to make things open and, hackable. By hackable, I mean you can work on it. And then the second part is, there's just so many possibilities for when you're not a public company with shareholders trying to get to 3 trillion. There's so many possibilities in technology if you're not optimizing for shareholders, right? And so one of the things I get excited about is the reason the online media landscape is so messed up is because of the incentives around it's all free content, it's all going to be ads where you're paying with your eyeballs. People have been talking about microtransactions to create a value for value exchange, where it's possible that what the reward is people think something is actually valuable, tip something, or they automatically do. Nobody's really done it because the big platforms like Google and Android, they have massive ad businesses, tiny little microtransaction businesses that potentially require more work, have a little bit of user friction, are a little bit confusing, are going to involve, Bitcoin or things like that, because you can't do this with credit card fees, that whole system. They're just not going to do it. And so for me, it's like, wow, the possibility of moving from an intention economy to a value exchange economy with microtransactions to power that, where when you go to read something, instead of instead of the author being paid with an ad, you are tipping them a half a cent or 0.1 of a cent or whatever it is, and that adds up over time. That's really powerful. And you don't need no user sign-up process. You buy a computer, and it potentially has it built in with no cost to the user. We're not saying, hey, this is our ideology, here's a worse user experience because it's the way the world should be. That's actually not really the way we think about it. It's like, to the user, it just feels exactly like their iPad. And for all intents and purposes, you've just changed the incentive landscape. Where authors could potentially get paid by microtransactions because you built it into your browser, you built it into your OS, you built it into your reader. And so whether it be Nostr or whether it be Lightning, Bitcoin, or however ways we do it, we think identity, payments, even storage, all can be done where there's very little compromise, if any, like zero, potentially even better user experience, and you just have more friendly underlying rails. The answer is often pick the best tool, and it's pretty obvious what the best tools are.
I think that's really cool. And again, talking about ideas whose time has come, and kind of this confluence of different things that have allowed you guys to build out this hardware and work with this, this stripped down Android OS, but then also to layer in things like Nostr for identity, and to have that again plugged into, if you're running several different Nostr clients all from your tablet here. And that's just a seamless experience for you. But then also, whether it be Lightning or like the advances that are being made right now with Chaumy and eCash are really, really cool. And it's getting better so much faster. I was talking with Callie, and like, just, it blows my mind, the stuff that they're doing and how fast it is and how well it works. And being able to build that in, again, the way you guys are talking about it at the OS level, where that's just a part of the experience. You're not saying, hey, this is a a Nostr and eCash and Bitcoin tablet. It's like, no, this is something else that's going to be better for you in terms of how you interact with technology. Also, the way in which you interact in a pro-social way within this ecosystem happens to be built on top of these specific rails. And I think that's, you'll bring a lot of inadvertently orange pill a lot of people just because they liked your product. Not because they were like, oh, it has Bitcoin, Bitcoin stuff built in, neat. It's like, no, they wanted a better solution. So I think that's pretty cool. And I wanted to know.
That's the great promise is it's not that, hey, we built something so Bitcoiners can buy it. It's more like, hey, we built something so moms everywhere say, I'm going to replace my Chromebook or my iPad for my kid with this. And they notice no difference. And you're just like, oh, you've just 10 times the size of how many people are Nostr users, because all of them, that's their identity, right? You've X% increased the number of Bitcoin users, because that is when they click on their Khan Academy article, like somewhere in the background, this many sats are being zapped over. So it's like, I think that's the real promise here.
That was actually a perfect segue to what I wanted to chat about next, which is speaking of moms and speaking of kids, the health of kids. And Tristan, I want to ask you on this, because again, I know that you've gone very deep down a lot of these rabbit holes, and kind of, can you talk a little bit just about, you talked earlier about, okay, here's kind of the damaging effects of these screens and whatnot, but it's more from like an adult perspective. We're talking about us right now being mostly fully formed adults, but still very susceptible to this. I have a 5-month-old son. He is wonderful, and I it's true what they say, like your life changes and you can't figure it out beforehand until it happens. Like, damn it, they were all right. But one thing I've noticed is, for some reason, if he sees a screen, he is weirdly pulled toward it. And we try to, like, whenever we're interacting with him, keep the phones away, like, don't have any screens, going in the background, and certainly don't be taking your attention from him and giving it to this little black box, because what kind of message is that sending to a forming brain? But just seeing how he's weirdly drawn to it. He has no idea what this phone is. He has no concept of knowing what it is. But for some reason, that pulls at him, these bright lights and these colors. Can you talk a little bit about like what this is potentially doing to our kids? Because Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they're kind of like the guinea pigs for being full digital natives. We don't know what that's going to mean in 20, 30, 40 years. Like, is there even any research? I hope there's some that's being done on the effects so far, but like, what do we actually know?
Yeah, we know that children, and the younger they are, the smaller their bodies are, the more susceptible they are. At least 2 to 5x. If they're infants, very little toddlers, it could be 10, it could be 100 times more susceptible to the electromagnetic effects of this technology. So there's kind of two components. There's like the actual electromagnetic effects, which is the light, the blue light, the EMFs, radio frequencies, and then there's kind of the mental cognitive development piece as well. So the electromagnetic aspects are, simple, right? They have smaller body sizes, so the same intensity of wave will affect them at a deeper biological level. Because it's penetrating. Like if you hold your cell phone up to your head to take a call, versus a child or a 10-year-old, let's say, is doing that, it's going to penetrate way deeper into their tissue. And another thing is on the body size piece is they're ergonomically holding everything closer to their body. So they're getting an increased exposure of intensity from that. And electromagnetic waves, again, we're talking about light and then RF, EMFs, things like that. Every distance that you get closer, the intensity of the field squares in increase. So if you get 2 times closer to your body, which most kids are holding their phone probably 2 times closer than someone with a fully developed forearm, they're getting 4 times increase in the field intensity. And then they have a developing biology, and they also have higher water content, which water is really important because it acts as kind of an antenna. So it's constantly absorbing and receiving frequencies. So that's kind of the physical components. And then when you get into the mental aspects, right, the neurotransmitters, the effect on dopamine and things like that, what are children doing their entire childhood development? They're learning, they're curious, they're programmed to be curious. Every parent will understand that kids become exact copycats of their parents. Whatever you do, they want to do. And, you really notice this, and they become enamored with any little object in their environment because that's how we learn as humans. So with the screens and with the environment they're around, you are choosing their reality that they're learning in. You are choosing their training ground. So if you're giving them a screen, you're training them to be in this artificial world that's highly stimulating, highly stressful on the body, and really pulling them in as a portal. And of course, they're more addicted, they're more drawn in. Anyone who doesn't have a kid can go on YouTube and look up a video of iPad kids, or like taking an iPad away from a 2, 3, 4-year-old. They lose their mind. They're so drawn in, because that's what their biology is programmed to do. It's programmed to learn, to dive in, and to see what's going on so that the biology gets a feedback loop, and then it can fine-tune its development to excel in that sort of environment. So that's what happens. And fast forward 10 years, I mean, smartphones have been around for a decent amount of time now. We're getting the early signs of this, right? We're getting mental health crises through the roof in teenagers, and suicides are increasing. I mean, overall, major depressive disorder is up 4x across the board for everyone in age groups since the turn of the century. And that's only going to continue to proliferate. And like you said, it's kind of a giant science experiment because we really don't know. And the other thing, if you want to get really deep, is kind of at the cellular level where this is kind of taking place. Mutations are happening at a genetic level, at a mitochondrial level, which actually is a byproduct of your environment, and then that can get passed down to the next generation. So if you have someone who's grown up in an artificial reality and then has kids when they're 25 or 30, they're already passing a baton, a torch, to their next generation that's been a bit fragmented. It's been kind of altered, and then that child is already set up for a lower kind of starting point. And then you're giving them an iPad when they're a year and a half, 2 years old, and they're always on screens. They're learning all day on screens. They're never outside anymore, which is really all kids should be doing, is getting outside and running around barefoot and playing and feeling. And, you're setting them up for failure. And that's why we're seeing chronic disease, mental health issues younger and younger. I mean, we're seeing Parkinson's in like your 40s and dementia. Like, this already was like an issue, a chronic disease, and now it's just happening earlier and earlier. And in my opinion, it's going to continue to happen. And unless there's an alternative, there's an intervention, and that's why we're so passionate about it. But now, I mean, fertility rates, people can't even have kids anymore. And the ones that maybe are just above that threshold, again, you're handing off the baton and maybe a not so ideal environment. So for us, one of the largest initiatives, one of the most important areas that we can be successful in is getting this in the hands of more moms, parents, children, because we want to create a future where they can learn but not be set up for failure at a biological level, because those early years of development are critical for the rest of your life in terms of a health context. So yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this. For a long time, I was like, shit, I'm just gonna like raise kids and they're not getting screens till they're 18. I mean, I don't know, like that was the decision. And there's a lot of parents, Montessori schools, Waldorf schools, that like, they don't even allow screens. And it doesn't have to be that way now. Like, we actually figured out something that is neutral to our biology and still can be like a productive tool for learning. And that's what's really exciting.
No, I mean, it's honestly so like kind of terrifying when you think about it. Just that this is a generation of guinea pigs right now. And to put your kid through that, like when I see really young kids that are just literally like glued to some, I don't know, bouncing fruit game or whatever. And it's like, I also can now empathize, because it's like, I get it. Maybe you needed to get something done. And so you just said, well, let me just give them this iPad and let them distract themselves. But that's like a really slippery slope. And it's also funny because if you look at some of the, biggest technologists whom, everybody knows, Steve Jobs or Zuckerberg, these guys didn't allow, or Mark doesn't allow their kids to use their own products. Mm-hmm. They were selling these products, or in Zuckerberg's case, giving them away for free, to your kids, but their own kids do not use these, or at least not until they're, 14, 15, 16. So that should kind of tell you everything you need to know, because these guys know how the sausage is made. Like they're the ones who make the sausage. They see everything that goes into it, and they don't want their kids eating that toxic sausage, at least until they're old enough to have their brains a little bit more developed. And so, I'm just kind of, curious, like, do you think that this is something that can be reversed? Can this be turned around? Or is it just kind of like too late for a massive swath of the population? Like, it's probably too late, I guess, for kids that have already grown up with screens since the age of 2 and are now, 16, 17, like maybe it's a little too late for them. I don't know. Like, is your focus kind of on folks of all, or parents who have kids of all ages, or are you really trying to target, like, look, for these younger generations now coming up, like, we have maybe we screwed up in this last time, but we have a chance to do things better, and we now have a better technology to do it. Like, is there hope for some of these kids, or is, like, I don't mean to sound dark, but like, are a lot of them just fucked?
No, I mean, there's hope for everyone. I mean, not just kids, like adults. I mean, anyone can benefit from healthier technology. And yeah, if you intervene and, your 5-month-old is never uses a blue lit iPad in his whole life and instead a daylight computer, yeah, they're probably going to be a lot better off than if, you had started that process 5 years later. But the reality is our biology, humans are very adaptive to their environment. And that's a blessing and a curse, right? That's why all these developmental issues happen in the first place, because we can adapt so quickly. And even though that happens and, the younger it occurs, it's very important. It doesn't mean there's no coming back from that. I mean, people can make substantial changes for the better in their health and their development and their long-term kind of just lifestyle if they just decide to do it and they have that healthier alternative. So this is for all ages, all kids, I mean, especially the younger ones. And we really, I mean, a message of hope and liberation is what we are trying to convey to the world, because for so long there was no alternative. And do we think that, we're going to reach 90+% of parents? Probably not. I mean, it's unrealistic to expect that. It's the same thing with Bitcoiners, or in general. How many people do you think are going to be awake enough or care enough to make a deliberate change in their lifestyle? We don't know. We hope it can be as many as possible, and we hope we can be a platform of education as to why these topics matter. But we do understand the pervasiveness that big tech has in our community. And there probably will be, a lot of smear campaigns, or like, I mean, there already is, right? Like EMFs and blue light, like there's nothing to worry about. Like, obviously there's no chance that Apple comes out tomorrow and says all these things are bad for you. Like, here's a healthier product. They can't, they're stuck. They have no incentive to do so. So for us, carving out a really nice niche in the community of parents and sovereign individuals and health advocates is a great option. And if that grows way beyond kind of a niche market, then that's amazing. But we don't judge success on converting everybody. We judge success on even changing a few lives. And we've already had that happen with folks with severe eye strain and TBI, way worse than mine, where they couldn't physically work a job in their adult life because they could no longer stare at screens. And now their entire life has changed because they have a daylight computer. So it's moments like that, like what is success? And really success is just having a healthier, more sovereign alternative. And that's why we're so excited. But we're not just going to stop until we've done all we can to, get this message out to as many people as possible.
And I think this is a problem that society faces over and over again in different forms. They call it like the invisibility problem. Like, this is the same as like leaded gasoline, where immediately you're like, oh, this stuff is better. And it's only over time you find out, oh, it has all of these side effects and unintended consequences. It's the same thing with smoking. Oh, I feel great. It's only over time you see all the unintended consequences to yourself and to your family, right? That's why sometimes we talk about blue light will feel like this generation smoking, which 20 years or 10 years from now we'll look back and be like, dude, that was insane. Giving 2-year-olds these things that are just destroying their circadian rhythms and metabolism, right? But that's just the reality. I think it's a similar thing with money. The printing of money is an invisible thing. It's only the consequences over time do you see the way it impacts you. And blue light, it's an invisible thing. It's the computer is not actually bright blue, not all the time, right? And so it's an invisible thing that the consequences hit you over time. And to your point, I think the great promise here is, because we are plastic, like, you'll notice the difference, right? Like, you put blue blockers on, you feel sleepy way sooner, within even like your first day or first couple of days. Like, the body is amazing. And I do think hopefully we'll be able to reverse it for a lot of children, and then especially this next generation, like your child, where they don't grow up with this. What's the possibilities of them, having that full capacity a human has? Because I love somebody's analogy, which is we're all just wearing lead backpacks all the time, whether it be microplastics or whether it be pesticides in food, whether it be blue light or being stuck indoors all the time. Like you could technically go through life always with a lead backpack with all of this stuff pushing on your physiology and on your psychology. But like at a certain point, those are going to have externalities. They're going to have side effects. You're already going to, it's going to hurt. And so just like let go of the lead backpacks. And I think that's the promise for the next generation.
You can't do anything about the microplastics in your balls, but you can do something about the blue light in your eyes. Maybe that's or maybe you can do something about the microplastics in the balls. I haven't seen the research. Tristan, anything on that? Or are we all doomed to have plastic in our balls forever?
I mean, yeah, don't wear polyester and, heat up plastic Tupperware in your microwave. That's my recommendation.
Yeah, just don't wear underwear, period. It's very fiat, let them fly. You don't need that compression. They were made to dangle. But anyway, that's slightly off topic there. It's funny. I feel like a lot of people, and this is myself included, we have like this love-hate relationship with technology where it's like, oh, technology is great. I hate it. Like this is so awesome. It sucks. This dualism of like, we see all the, like how many other things we're able to do thanks to technology. We've got these supercomputers, in our pockets. That's amazing. Like we can do so much with them. We've got these supercomputers that we're talking, across the country, across the world on right now. That's amazing. They are amazing tools. And in terms of social interaction online too, opening up these niche communities that we maybe never would have been exposed to without the internet, without these devices, without social media. But we start to realize, like, I don't like what this does to me sometimes. And it seems like what you guys are doing a little bit is like, it's an acknowledgement that, yeah, technology is fucking awesome, but maybe you don't have to hate it so much. And maybe it doesn't have to be so bad, but because we do still need it. Like, unless you're just like totally off the grid and are, like as close on that sovereignty spectrum as you can be and don't have any contact with the outside world, like you're probably going to need a phone or a tablet or something or a computer to do your work. And so like, is that kind of part of the driving here? Because I know you guys obviously both, you work very hard and you work from wherever you are. And so I remember, Anjan, you said, this is something that like you wanted to be able to use. You were trying to solve a problem for yourself. And can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, just as it relates to like the modern workplace is also shifting now, right? Like a lot of people can work outside if they choose to, but your laptop overheats or you can't fucking see the screen. Like how do you look at kind of solving that personal problem of, I know I need to use this stuff, but I want to use it in a different way?
I think it was just recognizing, we're not just a middle finger to technology. We're like a love letter to technology. That, like, you don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the power of technology is that we can be a better version of ourselves if properly applied. And the failure of current technologies, we're often the worst version of ourselves. And so the simple example that comes to mind is I was reading a book explaining how a combustion engine works, and like I just couldn't get it. And then instead, there was this interactive textbook that somebody had made where he had like actual 3D models of the engine, which the thing's moving, and you could rotate the engine around. And they would show you the cylinders and show you when the fuel gets injected and how the explosion happens. You could see it from the top. You could see it from the side. I understood how an engine worked. Like, I left that feeling way smarter. And so it's like, sure, you could read a paper book, but sometimes stuff is hard, right? You need video. You need the dynamism. And so, yeah, the possibility here is to reclaim the parts of computing that makes us the better versions of ourselves while holding off all the externalities, all the temptations, all the self-sabotage, and all the distractions. And you might end up with something that's humbler, but overall is better. And I think that's the key part here is stop optimizing for sex appeal and stop optimize for like core principles of health and productivity and, getting shit done and learning. And so I'm a bit frustrated that I'm not using a daylight computer now to have this call, right? But like, that's what we want to do next is like make a phone, make a laptop so you can do Zoom calls. The core compromise you would need is the lack of color. We might solve that in a couple of years, but as for now, that. And so there's just going to be some stuff you can't do. You're going to need, but for the most part, if the big compromise is Candy Crush, like that's kind of okay for me. Like I wouldn't mind taking this call in black and white. And so the possibility here is, just a simpler, minimal set of computers where your essay gets done a little bit easier. Your outline that you need to write for doing a video gets done a little bit quicker. That cancer researcher trying to figure out how to, cure lung cancer is able to finish that. Just across the board, a kid can go to sleep reading a cool interactive book that explains to them how rockets work. And so I'm very motivated by creating a whole legion of computers based around these values. And they all might look slightly different, but the core thing is how do you respect health? How do you respect attention? How do you respect freedom? And I'm willing to take trade-offs elsewhere, whether it be in sex appeal or, it's this thin or whatever it may be.
I mean, the daylight tablet does look pretty sexy though. If I can say that, like, I mean, and there's something I've got to say, your marketing around it has been really nice too, because I appreciate, like, it's such a breath of fresh air to see marketing that's like, go outside, like, whoa, what a concept, like, go be in the sunshine, and also maybe put this thing that we're selling you, put it down for a while and maybe don't use it all the time. Like, it's really, I'm like trying to think of something else that I've seen that has similar kind of marketing. It's really just not that. The contrast, the really stark contrast would be Apple's latest, tablet commercial, where they're literally crushing all these physical things together, literally destroying the physical world, destroying reality to plug it into an ever thinner little piece of attention-seeking technology, which is just sad. But the contrast was nice. So well done in that regard. But man, yeah, talk about like, I feel like even just when we look at VR and things like that, like it's a full-on rejection of the physical world. And there's cool stuff you can do with it. Like we had an Oculus headset. I got one early in the pandemic. Carla loved playing Beat Saber on it to get a little exercise. Like, had some fun with it. But like that virtual reality, I mean, perhaps it can replace reality for a lot of people, but never really, right? Because ultimately there's no way to replace reality when you are emitting these images into someone's retina. Like it, unless there's something I'm missing, but I just don't think like it can be done. And people say it's going to be indistinguishable from reality, but it's like, but that's not the same thing as being real, And now I'm rambling a little bit, but it just, it gets to me a little bit, some of this stuff, because it feels like we lost the plot.
We did. We definitely did. And, marketing's easy when it's seated in truth, authenticity, and realness. All we're doing is like saying, hey, like, let's get back in the real world. What is that? That's nature. That's the outdoors. That's physical connection with people in your community. That's real food. You can't fake that. And they might make you seem like, oh, this is really close to where, we're just going to be able to reincorporate all of that into a virtual setting. There's no chance that's that close and that'll ever be fully replicatable. We don't even understand the depths of our own biology clearly. So how could you believe this facade that they're preaching? And it's really that simple. So the job becomes pretty easy when we can just be like, hey, this is what we're about, and our product, our mission is to help facilitate a return to reality so you can have a more fulfilling life. And that's a fun mission to market, I will tell you that.
It's nice to see, and it's, again, I think you hit the nail on the head with when you're coming from a place of truth, it becomes a lot easier to figure out what the messaging should be, because the messaging is just the truth. You don't have to spin it. You don't have to sugarcoat it in some way. You don't have to bullshit people. You just have to tell them the truth about what you're about. And if that resonates with them, great. Then you haven't tricked them. And as founders, as builders, you don't have to feel bad about what you're creating. You can feel good about it, because I'm sure there are a lot of folks who have built a lot of different technologies over the years that probably feel perhaps pretty shitty about it if they look back and see the effects that they've had. And I mean, luckily you guys won't have to deal with that. I'm curious, just in a more general sense, because I had a few people ask this. Like, this was a question that was asked multiple times, and it's a very logistics one. But are you guys going to be shipping out like internationally to a bunch of different countries? And I had somebody ask about Turkey. I had another person ask about El Salvador. People want this, man. Like, they really want it.
Right now, internationally, we do Canada, the UK, and the EU, and we're basically just looking for indications of demand elsewhere. And then the second we feel like there's enough demand, we'll set it up. It's costly to do a new country, and so we're not a big company yet. So, but yeah. Intention is to slowly get more international.
I promised I would ask that one, so I wanted to get it in there. But I do want to talk just a little bit more about kind of sovereignty in general, and like what that actually means to you guys and how this factors into your mission. Because I view sovereignty basically like it's like an asymptote. It's always approaching. You can get closer and closer and closer to sovereignty. Like Bitcoin will get closer and closer to 21 million, but it won't ever quite hit it because you're cutting it in half, right? I view sovereignty the same way. Like, it's pretty much impossible to get absolutely every little thing so that you can say, yes, there is no part of any of my existence for which I depend on absolutely no one but myself. Right. And like, that's okay too, right? Like, that's not a bad thing. So all of our goals is to maximize our own personal sovereignty and make whatever trade-offs we deem appropriate for the furthering of our own purposes. But how do you guys look at that from the health, from the attention, from the technology perspective? Like, what does that actually mean to you guys in terms of how you go about creating this product, how you look at even just like what you want to make available on it? And you talked about Nostr and eCash integrations and things like that. But how does that, what's the goal there for you guys personally? Because we talked about, creating a product that solves your problems. What's that sovereignty problem that you were looking to solve at a personal level?
I think you've asked such a beautiful question. I think it gets into like deep philosophy of like what it means to be free or to be agentic. I think the thing that personally, so I don't know if it's an answer for your question, but at least personally, is I replaced my definition of sovereignty from being like not dependent on anything else to instead being having your choices respected and have the freedom to make open choices. And so you can choose to be in a dependent relationship with something, but the point is it's done out of consent. It's done out of choice. Because I think the whole, I don't want to be dependent on anything else is also unrealistic to what it means to be human. Like, humans are tribal creatures. It is the group that is what makes us human. But it's the fact that we can choose. And so the simplest lack of sovereignty for me when you're saying, like, how do we apply it is there's nothing wrong with Netflix. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with Instagram. They've booby-trapped and backdoor and set up the things that we use such that our free choice is being sabotaged. The problem is I go to write an essay and I'm on Instagram for 30 minutes. That can't just be my fault that like I don't have enough willpower or something like that. It's not like I go to Starbucks, right? And then I immediately start, I don't know, like going to the beer garden down the street. Like I can be reasonable in managing my will and my intention. Is these things are booby-trapped. And that is not a respect of my choice. My choice is constantly being undermined. I'm not able to be sovereign unless I'm constantly exercising so much willpower and so much push away, which for a lot of people, especially if you're neurodivergent, is unrealistic. It's the same thing with health. You can put blue light blockers on and you can do it. I'm just not conscientious enough to always wear blue light blockers. And that doesn't help with flicker. And so why are they impinging on my freedom to say, I want to go to sleep and wind down? Reed Hastings had a quote, which is that Netflix's competition is not like Hulu or Disney Plus, it's sleep. I'm like, dude, I can't believe you're saying that publicly. Like, I can't believe you were like literally saying what you're saying. But I don't have the freedom to quote unquote like live my life. They are trying to have an uneven playing field, which is in their best intents. So to me, really what sovereignty means in the digital world is what are your choices and how do you own them and how do you stop other people from sabotaging it and make the playing field a little more level? Whether that's health, whether that's attention, whether that's their business model, whether it's in these basic technologies around payments, identity, storage, networking.
I love that. What about you, Tristan?
Yeah, this is something I've thought about because these buzzwords always pop up, right? And I do, just talking about this, I feel like I overuse the word sovereignty and decentralization. Kind of inherently, we all probably do, right? But what does sovereignty actually mean? If you look it up, it means like supreme power, and you actually might want to call it individual sovereignty. And then if that's the goal, do we have supreme power and reign over our own lives? And the answer is that will never happen. Why? Because everything that Anjan just mentioned, we are being bombarded without consent. Perfection and individual sovereignty at the highest level is not feasible. It's just not possible given our environment. However, if you take deliberate steps to have a progression towards being more sovereign at an individual level, then that's really what you're looking for. That's, getting outside and eating real food and being able to have some kind of ownership over how you're using your attention and time. And yeah, but then, you're going to go to the park and they might be spraying the grass with chemicals, which happened to me this morning. Or there's chemtrails and, cell phone towers everywhere. You can't control things. So it's the nature of the world we live in. And then you do get into that individualism, right? Is that really the goal of, being a more sovereign individual, is to just lone wolf it? And of course not. You have to get there on your own journey and become that best version or a much better version of yourself. But then at a community level, you are always stronger when you're working together and have some resilience and redundancy through a collection of sovereign individuals. And that's what decentralization is. It's nodes of powerful areas and entities or beings in ourself. And that's really, I think, how you need to look at it, because it can become overwhelming and you can become neurotic. You can have a doomer mindset very quickly, whether that's when you go down the health rabbit hole, the geopolitical rabbit hole, the Bitcoin rabbit hole. The world is over, like this is a terrible situation. But think about, step back, it's like, okay, what can I control? How can I progress at an individual level of sovereignty? And then how can I extrapolate that outwards into the people, into the community around me, so I can embark change and perhaps embark a little snowball effect to where that collective sovereignty at an individual level continues to rise without even people realizing it. And that's all we're trying to build here, is optionality. And that is freedom, right? The ability potentially to, have a house in multiple countries in case things go wrong. That's freedom, because you have optionality. And that's why, these other passports are something that people are looking into. But having the ability to buy higher quality food, or in our case, having a piece of technology that is still allowing you to be productive without robbing you of some of your individual sovereignty, your cognitive sovereignty, that's freedom. The ability to have that choice. And that's really what we're after. So it's something that's tough to wrangle with. And as someone who's gone down a lot of rabbit holes, it's hard to step back. But I think getting to the root of these words is kind of fun, because we use them so often. And it's exciting. And I think we're all on a constant progression. And all we need to keep doing is moving one step forward and realizing that the more people we kind of infect with this positive, this hope, this liberation mindset, the more we're going to be able to change the world and kind of have this society that's empowered instead of the opposite. And yeah, that's my mission at an individual level, and also when I'm working for Daylight.
No, I love it. You mentioned that doomer mentality, which I think is nihilism is an easy thing to slip into for a lot of people, because it's like, well, everything's so fucked. Like, what can we do? And you see the kind of posts all the time that are like, oh, how could you possibly bring a child into this world when things are as bad as they've ever been? And it's like, well, to the antinatalists, like, you're free to not reproduce. The rest of us will. You can voluntarily self-select yourselves out of the gene pool. That's fine. But like, you don't need to. Like, there's a lot of things that give me hope, but I'm curious, like, what's the biggest white pill for you guys? What's the biggest beacon of hope that you look at and say, you know what, things are going to be all right, and this gives me the drive to keep working toward that future?
I think for me, it's it's just the existence proof that, like, we were even able to do this. Like, who are we? Like, somebody was joking, there's a company that's raised hundreds of millions of dollars called Humane that tried to make a more humane computer. He said one person on Humane's team had more experience than all of us on Daylight. One person. And so the fact that we were able to do this, and on a relatively humble budget, given the category, it just gives me hope that a lot of the time the world is not the best version of itself, not because it's not possible, but because there's a lack of courage, a lack of bravery, a lack of obnoxiousness, however you want to do it. And so the question I ask myself is, damn, I don't think we're anything special, and we were able to do this. Imagine, like, in other fields, how many other opportunities like this are possible. And it just needs a small group of motivated people with patience, with a bit of pain tolerance, and some persistence. And so that's the big white pill for me is, wow, the world is not the best version of itself. And a lot more is possible than you think if a couple motivated people come together. So,
Yeah, I think it's really just the antithesis of self-limiting beliefs. The benefit of technology and the benefit of the world we live in, but also the kind of detriment of it, is that there is an unlimited amount of information available to us, and that insane amount of choices and paths that you can now take is actually a detriment for a lot of people, especially people who are quite, like, low dopamine and stuck in the artificial reality that modern technology is keeping them in. But if you have that ability to remove yourself, you can accomplish anything. I mean, at Daylight, I think we pride ourselves in having a very well-rounded set of team members, people that can do anything. I mean, Anjan is the king of generalists, and I'm an electrical engineer, and I'm doing marketing and things like that. It's fun because you have all of these opportunities to learn, and the fact that so many Bitcoiners are the same way. They've come from all these walks of life, and then now they're embarking change. Really, the sign of hope, the white pill, is like, look at where we're at. Look at all this that we've already done, and that is the most motivating factor you could ever have. And when I had my concussions, all I said, and I was in this really dark place, like 5 months in, felt at my absolute bottom, I told myself, if I could just be 10%, 20% better than I am right now, that will make the world of a difference. I don't even care if I never get back to my baseline. If I just get 20% better in the next year, that's a win. And then every time you make that progression, you look back and you're like, oh my God, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep progressing. We're going to keep iterating. We're going to learn along the way, and we are going to win, to quote Marty Bent, right? And we are going to not stop until we achieve the society, the products, the community that we want to achieve. And even being in this space now, both the Bitcoin and health space, for like 6+ years, I mean, just look back at 5 years ago, Anjan as well, like when he first thought of this, Like, it's incredible. There's no stopping this train now, and all you need to do is look at all the amazing things that are being built to realize that. And that's why it's so fun to show up every day to life, to work. You can have that doer mindset, but I'd rather be living right now than any other time in human history. And this is this weird transitional period. It could last 5 years, could last 10 years, could last 200 years. Who knows? But we're part of that, and that's pretty cool. So that's why I, wake up every day pretty excited.
And just to give you a quote that like really landed this for me is somebody said in a very depressing fashion. They said the saddest part about modern reality is it's easier to make a god than to agree. And the example he was giving is we're gonna have AGI before we move away from the QWERTY keyboard.
That's a wild thing to think about.
And QWERTY is like not efficient. Like we all have a little bit more carpal tunnel. Like our fingers and hands all hurt. You can literally type the word typewriter in the first row of a QWERTY keyboard. Like all of us, our primary way of interacting with a computer is a typewriter sales guy's stunt to show that they could do. And the fact that we're going to have AGI before we move to a more efficient keyboard format, like that just blows my mind. And to me, so validates how inspiring something like Bitcoin is, because it is getting people to agree. That thing that is harder to do than to create a god. And it was one guy, or who knows, Satoshi out of nowhere, pulling things together to our point of it just takes somebody with the right grit or courage. And so, to me, that's so powerful. An example of getting humans to actually coordinate and agree around something.
It's a wild thing to think about with the keyboard versus AGI comparison. That's quite a nice parallel to draw. What was off topic? What was that other? There was another style of keyboard that like started to gain prominence for a while. You know what I'm talking about?
Dvorak, Colmac.
Yeah, there was a couple that were like inarguably better.
Yes,
but just like people were like, well, we got this one already, so I guess. And I feel like so much of our, let's say, technological lives is kind of built around that idea of, well, we've got this already. What are we going to do?
Exactly. And then you start to appreciate Bitcoin, where you're like, dude, if you told me you could convince everybody to switch keyboards, like switching money is only that much harder, right? Like there's very few things that are going to be harder than switching keyboards, and money is one of them. And it's like the fact that this thing is like on its way is just mind blowing.
Yeah, you might have just like invented a nice new like barometer there. Like, is it harder than getting people to switch keyboards? Like, yes or no? Like, you use that as your demarcation of like, can this be done? You know, like
I don't think
I like
I've
that.
heard Bitcoiners talk this way, so yeah,
They do.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. And I'd love to know too, because what you guys are doing, you're doing hardware and software. That is always harder than doing a lot of people these days. It's like it's just software, which is hard enough on its own. But doing hardware and software is like quite an undertaking, because you have to actually physically make something, and you guys were making something that is new. Do you have a message for folks out there, younger entrepreneurs or older entrepreneurs? They can be boomers too. They can be Joe Biden's age even, perhaps. Anyone can create something new. But do you have a message for people who like look at this and say, oh my God, that's, it's so daunting. Like I'd love to do something like that, but like, I couldn't possibly, do the hardware too. Like, cause I think that's the big block for a lot of people is like, well, where do you even start?
I'm sorry, I don't think I actually have a simple answer here, because
fair enough.
we came in right through the skin of our teeth. The reality is the supply chains in the world are messed up, and they're all about scale, and they're all about conventional. So what makes innovation hard is if you do try to make it in a way that is producible, it's insanely difficult, because you have to get all these gatekeepers, all those third parties to work with you. Elon Musk says it. The thing is hard to build, but the thing that makes the thing is the real hard thing. That's totally true. And so I actually think there's a social function missing of rich people basically helping create new factories, new supply chains, whether it be robots or this, that'll lower the barrier for innovation. Because right now, technology is so homogenous. There's only a couple people who make it. In nature, there's so many niches with so many different species. Where's the equivalent in technology? We need lots of people and lots of companies making lots of different things, and then you get competition as well. And so,
Do you think
I feel like a
3D
societal
printing?
innovation.
Do you think 3D printing kind of get like there have
Yeah,
been some incredible advancements, obviously, and even just the last couple of years. But
yeah,
do you think that starts to get to that point where
yep,
anybody can fab in their basement and be their own little mini factory?
totally. Yeah, especially for the mechanical side of things, things that are highly mechanical. I think it's still not there yet, but every year we're getting closer and closer and closer. Some of the new parts, the metal 3D printed parts, are as strong as normal ones. That wasn't the case, and you just need rich people to subsidize things. Like every time you make an electronic product, all the wires, they're called flexes. They're all customized. And it's like, who can afford to make all this custom? It shouldn't be custom. We're making a tablet, they're making a tablet, they're making a tablet. Like, we all should be utilizing the same. So somebody just needs to make a bunch of designs that are that standard that other people could use.
But we could spend an entire podcast going into how it's really messed up. And Tristan used to work deeply in this industry, so he gets it even better than me.
Well,
But
well, I'm curious, Tristan, then from your perspective, like, do you think, because I think lack of standardization is always a huge issue, and I think a lot of the reason that you get lack of standardization is because when everything is closed source and held very tightly to the chest,
there's no incentive.
there's no incentive to share. There's no incentive to standardize, because if you standardize, you have to tell somebody else how you're doing it, right? Like, is that the main thing? Do we start to get away from that just with more of an open source ethos?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the secret sauce, or kind of like how you go about doing things, if you cross pollinate and collaborate, that's a win, right? So I think the most important thing about our communities, our, mission is, how do we get more of these companies, right? Like we did at my conference this weekend, we had Matt Hill from Star 9 and Anjan talking about it. It's like, why are there two companies doing this? What, there should be 10, there should be 20. It's obviously extremely challenging from the supply chain, from, the top heavy centralized big tech world we live in, to break through. But if there were more companies, it would allow for kind of that collaborative effect. And then that's when you all win, because you can drive innovation forward, you're competing against each other, and then the end consumer is coming out with optionality, which turns into, proliferation of free choice and sovereignty. So it's, there's just been gatekeeping. There's been so much control and monopolization in the semiconductor electronics tech industry for 2 decades now. And you see the government interventions trying to play a role in that, and hand out even more breaks and grants. I mean, do you know how much it costs to build like a semiconductor fab? It's insane, right? And we talk about the number one, maybe top 3 issues in the world right now with Taiwan and China, right? So it's very delicate, and it's very interesting to think about how we could improve this. But there's no immediate solutions besides, putting in the proof of work and getting a few off the ground and successful to lead the way forward for the rest. And that's what we're excited to see as well. We don't want to be kind of only ones for the next 20 years doing something. We want to see way more competition.
Yeah. I mean, I love that that's the mentality, because I think everybody benefits when there is competition, right? Like, you're going to naturally make things better. It's going to force you as a company to be better, to be more inventive, to be more clever. And ultimately you're going to make a better product because when you're competing against somebody, because then you've got something to benchmark against. Are we X amount better than they are? Are we doing this better? And like, it's a powerful thing. And so much of our economy has become quite monopolistic, but not necessarily natural monopolies forming. It's because the barriers to entry are so damn high, and made higher by regulations, which are pushed by the folks at these large organizations who have the giant team of lawyers to make sure that you've got to jump through, 69 hoops to be able to even get in the front door. And so, I have hope that that's going to change. I think that's a very slow process, though. But back to Bitcoin fixes this. Maybe fixing some of the incentives at the base layer starts to. Maybe sapping some of that power away from the state starts to turn the tides a little bit back to what they naturally should be, which is more natural competition. Like competition is natural, like and good. Like let's compete more. You know, we all get better because of it. But I want to be conscious of both of your scarce time here. We've run for the time flew right by here, and I appreciate your attention and your time because I know you guys are working really hard. So I want to just end on a totally different note, which is there a book you'd recommend, like one that you really love that you will recommend to everyone? And then, are you reading anything right at this moment, perhaps on your Daylight tablet, that you would recommend from a more like, I'm reading this right now and I dig it perspective?
Sure. I have both a physical copy and I'm reading it on my Daylight, but it's a graphic novel called Unflattening. It's basically about how all of reality, all the beauty of it, has been reduced and flattened. You know, put into a spec, put into an objective. And what makes reality awesome is we're full beings, we're complex. You know, we have many dimensions to us. So it's just a great reminder that, you know, it's kind of, what do they call it? Like Teach for America or Common Core or something, where, you know, everything's reduced down to a spec. Oh, everybody passed their test, they must be educated. And it's like, no. It goes back to the principle you were saying. How do you make things back to being natural and real and holistic, right? Which includes spirit and source and, you know, your health and all of this. So I've been loving this one. And a book that really impacted me historically, I think, was Brave New World. I would recommend that for your audience. Because 1984 is what happens when, you know, all the things we're afraid of, you know, comes upon us, a totalitarian regime. Brave New World is like, what happens when everything you've wanted happens to you? And you lose your freedom in the process, right? It's like, it's Neil Postman puts it, Brave New World is the future where we win and still lose. And I think that's what VR and living forever wearing diapers in VR is like. You know, you technically have everything a human needs, and then the soul and the heart is lost in it. So I think it's a beautiful reminder of, you know, false victories.
Oh, well said. And I also, it seems that the graphic novel you're reading now is basically a characterization of that Apple ad with just smashing everything. Just smashing everything.
Yeah, exactly.
We're back full circle there. Okay. What about you, Tristan?
Yeah, the book that changed my life was called The Brain Changes Itself by Norman Deutsch. And it just talks about all these profound, you know, healing stories and journeys of people with far more traumatic brain or nervous system injuries than I had. And you read that, I mean, you could change your entire mental framework of like where you are today and then what you can achieve. And Anjan mentioned it, right? We're plastic. Our brains have the ability to change. This is a relatively new scientific discovery also. And that's why these invisible, you know, inputs and invisible things in our environment are so kind of gray to the standard centralized system, because it's a new thing. It's esoteric. It borders on the, you know, line of science and fringe, but it's real. And that changed my complete, you know, understanding and belief system around what I could achieve. And then for everyone who wants to learn more about health and light, there's a book called Health and Light. It was written in the 70s by John Ott, and we actually, I think, put it on the tablet as one of the PDFs to read. And there's a cool documentary, if you don't like reading, on YouTube, which it's in black and white, I'm pretty sure. So this is, you know, it's a perfect mirage. But it's funny to me because he talks about all the things that we have talked about, maybe at a slightly higher level because it was the 70s, in terms of lighting, affecting, you know, the cognitive behavior of children in schools and affecting the way plants grow and the importance of full spectrum sunlight. And you think about it, and there's a similar book on EMFs and from Robert O. Becker and Andrew Marino. But you think about it, what was going on in the 70s? Like, this information was out there, and then it became suppressed. And I think about this very often, that we've had these thoughts, we've had these solutions and ideas, and, you know, John Ott went on to make like a special fluorescent light bulb that was full spectrum. And obviously after a few years, you know, it stopped production, and that was that for the next like 30 years. So, and then I think about 1971 and the timing of that, and there's a lot of correlations with our food system, a similar, down ramp. It's like right when things were kind of getting to a point of we're gonna, change for the better. We're learning from our mistakes. And then fiat money became the supreme ruler. And since then, we've been on this downward spiral. So there's always a framing there that involves, the monetary system. And that one's a good one. So I highly recommend checking that out.
I was really hoping you were going to bring it back to what the fuck happened in 1971, and you did not disappoint there. No, it is, and that could probably talk for hours just about how much the food did get fucked up right around that period, and how so much of it, I mean, literally, like if we just talk about corn production being jacked through the roof, because why? The government threw around a bunch of subsidies. Like this is so many of these things come back to state intervention, and it's like people will often accuse Bitcoiners of being reductionist in this way, where it's like, well, you can't just bring everything back to the to the money, and it's like, but man, you can bring a lot of it back there, and it turns out when you fuck with the base layer of everything, you fuck with everything, and that's both a terrible thing in the context of where we've been up until the creation of Bitcoin, but a very hopeful thing in terms of where we can go in the future because of Bitcoin, because of the change in the incentive structure. So that's like it's a really black pill, but it's like, oh, that's a really nice orange white pill after that. So, and now we've got your backlight is amber, right? For when you read at night.
Amber pill.
There we go. Even better. It's I've got, right now I've got my little, my nighttime reading light that it's red or amber. And it's very nice for reading my physical books.
Is it the nice ones as the daylight, like brand colors are like orange and then the tablet amber is orange? Like it just, it all lines up. Because big tech is blue, right? Which is the other side of the color wheel. Like it's so
like
funny.
They're all blue, like just all of them. Did you guys put the
blue brands? Yeah.
Did you put the Bitcoin white paper on the tablets as well? Is that one of the PDFs? That's awesome. So like what Apple did before they removed it from everything sad that they had to remove it, but glad you guys are bringing it back to be on that first screen, when you're booting up the device and flipping through what's on there, it's like, oh, Bitcoin white paper. And that's another great, like, amber pill to orange pill, I guess. It's a new way of discovery there. So I think that's beautiful. Where should people go? Daylightcomputer.com. Is that it's .com, yeah?
Yeah, daylightcomputer.com. Singular.
Yep. Okay. And anywhere else you wanna send folks? I'll link your Twitter and your Noster in the show notes. But anywhere else, or if not, any last parting words of wisdom?
Just Noster or Twitter, just at Daylight Co. Even Instagram, the same. And we're almost completely sold out. So we have I think a little under 500 units left. We're hoping to get more.
Wow.
We accept Bitcoin for payment, and any collaborators, investors, people want to work for us, like we're open to it all. So email us at hello@daylightcomputer.com, because I think your audience is probably the type of people that we're looking for.
And that's the
awesome.
Key thing here is the way the intentions become reality is you find the right investors, you find the right engineers, you find the right marketers. And so it's really about getting in touch with the right people.
All right. Well, if you're listening right now and you think you're one of those right people, hit them up. That's awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for sharing your scarce time, for giving me your attention for this. This has been fascinating. Might have to have you guys on again, because I feel like there's a lot of different rabbit holes and tangents we could dive into, and maybe we'll have to do it in person at some point, out in the sunlight, and
yes.
We need to get some more of that beautiful ball of fire in the sun on the sky on our skin during these interviews. I think it really warmed things up even more. So, but thank you guys so much. It's been awesome.
Thank you for the thoughtful questions. This was super enjoyable.
And that's a wrap on this Bitcoin Talk episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. If you're a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, head to bitcoinpodcast.net/sponsor. If you're enjoying the Bitcoin Podcast, consider giving a 5-star review wherever you listen, or sharing this show with your network. Or don't. Bitcoin doesn't care. You can find me on Nostr by going to primal.net/walker. And if you want to follow the Bitcoin Podcast on Twitter, go to @TitcoinPodcast and @WalkerAmerica. You can also find the video version of this podcast at youtube.com/@WalkerAmerica and @WalkerAmerica on Rumble. Bitcoin is scarce. There will only ever be 21 million, but Bitcoin podcasts are abundant. So thank you for spending your scarce time to listen to another fucking Bitcoin podcast. Until next time, stay free.